Jnananjana Chakshurvata Tasmai Shri Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare. Today I'm going to discuss a perspective of first world realities. And these realities also affect the second and third world. Because as ISKCON in the second and third world comes out of the pioneering phase, what you'll hear today could very well be your experience in the coming decades. Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, as you know, started in the first world. It was a first world phenomenon that then went global. And the first world ISKCON during the 70s, 80s was leading the way. It was the major emphasis and impact of ISKCON. Since that time, however, ISKCON right now is booming in the second and third world. And in terms of reaching out to the wider population, beyond our very fortunate and sacred Indian congregation, beyond that congregation, ISKCON in the first world needs some help. Let me give you an example of what it was like in the good old days when ISKCON First World was reigning supreme, so to speak. I remember 1975 or 76. I walked into the BBT trustee's office in Los Angeles, and I couldn't see him. And then I noticed he was spread out on the floor behind his desk. On the floor. And on his chest was a letter. And I found out that the letter was from Srila Prabhupada saying, take all the money in the North American BBT, send it to India. These days would probably be the reverse. So what has happened? We have some crises, we have some challenges, and we're going to take a look at those crises and challenges and see if we can perceive a way forward. The crises we're going to talk about, the challenges we're going to talk about today are threefold. Urban outreach to the wider population. Farm projects. What are we doing with farms anyway? What are they for? How do we get farms in the first place, whatever few that we have? And development of devotees leading to succession for leaders. Let me make it clear first that when we talk about the first world, I am referring to what intelligent periodicals, media meant for thinking persons, what they refer to as the established free market democracies. That means, of course, USA, Canada, it means the UK, it means Western Europe, Scandinavia, Central Europe, not East Europe. And also it includes established free market democracies, include those former British offshoots in Australia and New Zealand. Although they're way down under, last stop before Antarctica, they're still Western European enclaves in terms of their origin and main influence. So let's look at ISKCON in these places. Right now we see that for the most part, and there are exceptions, but for the most part, ISKCON in the first world is an expression of our fortunate and blessed Indian congregation. Our temples and centers in the first world do not reflect the wider population of the countries that they're located in. In the 60s and 70s, it was the reverse. But some things have happened. The climate, the social climate of the first world has changed since the 60s and 70s. There have been ISKCON leadership problems, and the result is that at this point in time, 2014, we can say that we are very thankful to our auspicious Indian congregation for rescuing so many temples that would have otherwise gone under. Still, we want to take a look at the wider picture, because Prabhupada intended that ISKCON, of course, reach the whole world. Just think what Bhaktivedanta Swami had in mind. And Srila Prabhupada took that concept and developed it all over. Bhaktivedanta Swami covered India with 63 to 64 Gaudiya Maths. They were highly organized. They were extraordinarily powerful with extraordinary momentum. So basically what you saw that Prabhupada did was he took Gaudiya Vaishnavism, following the footsteps of his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Swami. Prabhupada took Gaudiya Vaishnavism way out of the village guru tradition, in which a preaching mission is dominated by one acharya. His word goes about everything material and spiritual, and in a particular geographic area he holds forth. As you know, Bhaktivedanta Swami wanted that the Gaudiya Math have a governing board and proceed in that way. So what you can see that our acharyas had in mind was the most effective way to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. When you look at the material realm, what is the most effective organization for dealing with material goals? What's the most effective organization in the world? Effective type of organization? Multinational corporations. In many cases, multinational corporations have more economic activity than whole nations. The most successful multinational corporation in the world, ExxonMobil, dealing with petroleum, clears in profit every year, minimum of $50 billion clear profit. So, that is ISKCON's heritage in terms of how we operate as a spiritual movement. We're a multinational organization spread all over the world. And that means we should be thinking about how to reach everyone in the population. Due to various external factors of social climate in the West, as well as internal problems, we've been concentrating on what we could call the low-hanging fruit. And that low-hanging fruit, indeed, is very juicy and sweet. The Indian congregation, very fortunate, very auspicious. So we focused in the first world now, and you can see the results of that focus in terms of our clientele, our congregations. We focused on that low-hanging fruit, but my point in addressing you today is to say it's time we advance up the tree to fruit that may not be as immediately ripe, but nevertheless we have to climb higher on the tree. I'd like to consider two things: facility and attitude. Look at those of you who are from first world temples, those of you who have been to the first world ISKCON temples and participated in the congregation. I'd like you to think, if you knew nothing about bhakti, if you were non-Indian, didn't have a fortunate Indian background, and you walked into any of our temples in the first world, what would happen to you? How would you cope? So what I'd like to propose to you is that we need to walk a few kilometers in the shoes of someone who knows nothing about Krishna, has no Indian background. How would they approach us and feel welcome and feel accommodated? Not only walk in their shoes, but take on their mindset and just think. In other words, if we're going to be open for business to the whole world, we have to have the appropriate facilities, and we have to have the appropriate attitude. So it could be that for many decades now we've been rolling on automatic pilot. Yeah, the temple's here. Hey, what do you want to have lunch? You interested in Krishna Consciousness? Just walk in the door, sit on the floor. Someone may talk to you. That seems to have been the end. Or else, you may meet someone who says, hey, we're not open today, there's no one around, but come to my small group and we'll cultivate you there. That's nice, of course, but the point I'm making is that if we can consider our centers, our temples, as facilities for receiving guests, welcoming guests, we would be much better situated. Another point I'm going to develop today, hopefully, is that our problems in succession, finding in the first world leaders who want to push things on, that problem begins at our front door. In other words, because we haven't been so good at showing hospitality, cultivating newcomers, therefore, in the first world, there are leadership succession problems. I travel on every continent of the world regularly, and I've also talked with other international traveling devotees, and they say the same thing. I've talked to temple presidents in the classic big city ISKCON temples, and they say if they look over their shoulder, now that they're in their 60s, there's no one behind them who wants to take up such a role. Not only is there no one who wants to, there's also very few, if any, to consider for such a capacity. So I'd say that these succession problems are from a cultivation and training problem. The cultivation and training problem begins with a doorstep problem, a front doorstep problem. Just think. And I'm speaking again about the first world, which has totally different dynamics than the second and third. Perhaps we have made things very difficult. And we're satisfied with the juiciness of that auspicious low-hanging fruit. Prabhupada was alert to these things, and I'll give you some examples. I noticed in 75, 76, maybe Maharaj here remembers, Prabhupada sent a series of letters to temples. He had it come from his secretaries to all ISKCON centers. The first letter, I have noticed a decline in the quality of the Sunday feast prasad. Remember that? This Prabhupada was onto it. The Sunday feast for non-Indian devotees, for Western devotees, was the biggest recruiting mechanism in the late 60s and 70s. The counterculture was at its height. And so every Sunday, all kinds of young people would just pack into our centers, ready for the Sunday feast, ready to turn their back on society, move into the ashram, sleep on the floor. It was great. So Prabhupada himself said, I noticed a decline in the quality of the Sunday feast prasad. And then he had his secretary read out a list of 13 preparations that were essential at a Sunday feast. 13 preparations. If you saw the list, which Prabhupada considered the minimum, wow! Everything from melpura, sweet rice, to 13 preparations. Prabhupada said, this is the minimum. Now, of course, in many of our first world centers, very few devotees know how to cook. And at best, you'll get maybe four or five preparations. Just remember Prabhupada's standard was 13. Second letter he sent out. How to receive guests at our first world center. He wrote that there should always be prasad on hand, kept warm like in a bakery, throughout the day, so that any visitor can walk in and get very nice halava, puri, sabji. The cook, Prabhupada instructed. He actually specifically instructed how to cook. The cook should prepare a batch of prasad in the morning, keep it warm during the day. If someone comes and takes it all, a visitor comes, and there's no more prasad, the cook prepares another batch. If there's anything left over, at the end of the day, the devotees can have it. So this shows you that Prabhupada had practical considerations for how the outreach would be effective. Another point, I think I'm going to sit down. How many of you have been to the New Dwarka Temple in Los Angeles? Please raise your hand. All right. When that building was first purchased, it was a church. The main building where the temple is. So, Prabhupada told the devotees who were converting the building from a church to ISKCON use, which meant temple, so on and so forth. He told them, don't take the chairs out of the main church room. Leave them there so that guests can come and feel comfortable hearing lectures by sitting in chairs. He told the devotees that. Evidently, the devotees felt that was, they couldn't compute. We're Hare Krishnas. That means all the actions on the floor. You stand on the floor, you sit on the floor, you sleep on the floor, you eat on the floor. Hare Krishna. So they couldn't evidently compute what Prabhupada was talking about, and they took all the chairs. So I'm giving you these examples so that you understand that Prabhupada was concerned with how people would be received, the impression that a first-time visitor would get. What would happen when a first-time curious person walks through the door? How do you get that person to the next step? Let's go now to before 2nd Avenue. Mukunda Maharaj told me all about this. He's based in Australia now, and he told me. He said, before 2nd Avenue, Prabhupada was in the area doing loft programs. He was holding forth at various artist lofts. Top floor of the building, you see the eaves of the roof. And And people would come to Prabhupada's loft programs. And this is how Prabhupada would do it, Mukunda Maharaj told me. He would make some kirtan. He just had some kartals, and he would chant and lead the people in chanting. And then he would give a lecture, which was Siddhanta, wrapped in like Indian folk knowledge. You know, he would tell them about India because they were curious, you know. They were artists, counterculturals, cool people. So he would tell them interesting things about India, while at the same time always presenting the message of Bhagavad Gita. And then when he was finished, he would himself distribute finger food to them. He would go around distributing the finger food, a little prasad, and make small talk with the people. How are you? What do you do? You just see Prabhupada doing this, reaching out, creating facility, showing the right attitude. He was so aware of the needs of his budding congregation, and this was before 2nd Avenue, that when the future Mukunda Maharaj got into some trouble with the police, false charges, and his name was in the paper for being a marijuana dealer. It was all false. Prabhupada had read the newspaper so that when the future Mukunda Maharaj came to the loft gathering, Prabhupada said to him, Michael, is everything all right? What happened? And so the future Mukunda Maharaj explained that he was framed, it would all be taken care of, and it was. He was cleared like that. So this shows you Prabhupada's attitude. And that attitude led to a place, a facility. So again, I want to stress two things, facility and attitude. We've forgotten in the first world what our temples are meant for. Our temples have become in-house, ours. Where is the place where guests can feel it's their place? Wouldn't that be a radical consideration? So in other words, I'm asking you to start to rework your conceptions. Instead of thinking the temple is ours, think that we need to make an arrangement, a facility, so that our guests can say, this is our place, this is for the guests. So in this way, we can rework our mentality. Instead of having so many barriers in place, I'll jump ahead now and say that I supervise some outreach centers for 20 years now, down under, especially in New Zealand. And again, those are Western European societies, multi-ethnic now. But basically in origin, British. And so we've developed a motto for our outreach projects. Number one, we want that when people come to these outreach centers, they identify that this is my place. We don't want them thinking, I'm going to the Hare Krishna's place. We want them to think, I'm going to my club. If any of you are from the first world and you know what urban life is like, if you're a cool, sophisticated person, or think you are, you always tell your friends, I'll take you to my club. I'll take you to my cafe. Ooh, you're with it, you know. Okay, we'll go to your club, we'll go to your cafe, and then you can, and then we'll take you to ours. And that way, that's how, you know, it's networking. It's the way that life goes on in the cities these days. And especially bear in mind, in Western cities, in the first world, practically no one under 30 knows how to cook anymore. Forget it. That means they're going out to eat every night, whether it's McDonald's, Burger King, or depending on how much money they have. My youngest brother, I'll talk more about that, when he was in his mid-20s, and he and his wife both were high-flying lawyers, and they would come home from work at 7:30 in the evening, living in Manhattan in New York City. They'd come to their condominium, and they had a deal. Whoever is the less tired would do the cooking. There were no gender-specified roles in the house. If you call on their answering machine, if you try to call them and they're not home, the answering machine clicks in. First you hear his name. Hi, this is so-and-so. Then you hear her name. Hi, this is so-and-so. Everything is equal, you see. So whoever was the less tired was supposed to cook. But none of them ever cooked because they both said we're both tired. So every night they just go out to eat. That's the urban reality these days. Remember Kurma Prabhu and his cookbooks? How many know about Kurma's cookbooks? Raise it. He used to make a good living teaching cooking lessons. But what happened? His clientele was always above 40 years old. Because young people weren't interested in it. Young people in their 20s and 30s, they're not interested in cooking. They just go out to eat. And then what happened, his market for the older people above 40 dried up because in Australia there's so many cooking chef shows on television. Master Chef, MKR, My Kitchen Rules, and so those TV shows took away his above 40 market, and the young people weren't coming. So he had to figure out other ways of support. So my point is, I'm starting to explain the need for outreach centers in the first world cities that people can identify with. This is my place. This place has good food. This place has good ambience, good camaraderie. It's cool. I've got to eat somewhere in the evening. Where am I going to eat? I've got to hang out with some people. Where am I going to go? So, another letter by Prabhupada. Around 1976. He had his secretary send out a letter to everyone. And this might be a bit shocking. The letter said, now we have enough temples. Now we have enough temples. What we need are restaurants combined with reading rooms. In other words, Prabhupada was thinking facility. Facility in terms of how people can come and approach bhakti. Good food, good ambience, chairs, couches. Western people, when they're comfortable, they're sitting in chairs, they're sitting on a couch, and they're just talking, they're eating. That's the way it is. They're not comfortable unless they're hatha yogis. They're not comfortable sitting on the floor. You may, if you open your eyes, if you have any non-Indian guests at your first world temples, you may notice how uncomfortable they are when they're trying to sit on the floor, and they're moving their leg this way and that way, and fidgeting, and it's just not natural for them unless they're yogis. And if they're yogis, you'll see they're sitting very in lotus position, making sure you know that they're yogis. But most people aren't like that. And they're not comfortable hearing in that way. So, just think, Prabhupada said in 76, we have enough temples. He's referring to the first world. Let's do this. Let's create situations with prasad and ambience, couches, chairs, where people can introduce the bhakti and brought along. What happened to that idea? It went over a devotee's head. We're Hare Krishnas. That means temple, deities, marble floor. That's where it's at. But Prabhupada was looking ahead. Prabhupada was not mired in the counterculture. He used it, but he was always looking ahead for new market trends, emerging market trends, so that ISKCON could maintain its market share. He's always looking ahead. At the peak of the countercultural wave, he was telling Devamrita Maharaj, the next phase is yours. Education is the next phase. Very few devotees understood what he's talking about. He's a counterculture, you know, PhDs. Who cares? What Prabhupada was seeing emerging markets. You can see, obviously, the counterculture couldn't sustain itself. Sooner or later, anything based on sense gratification just does away with all its external trappings and just gets down to plain old sense gratification without anything, you know, polishing it. And so that's what the countercultural movement turned into. Why simply sense gratification with all this alternative mentality on top? Just get down to basic sense gratification. So, I'm telling you these things so we can start to perhaps change our mind and our mindset about how we look at our situation in the first world. It's interesting, some of the devotees who have attended previous sessions, they've told me that, for example, there was two devotees from Assam, and they said, even though it's not the first world, we could take something from your seminar, because in Assam, we are mainly, almost exclusively reaching the Bengalis and the Marwaris. But in terms of the Assam people, who are the vast majority, we're not reaching them. So let's bear in mind, again, that Prabhupada wanted everyone to come. And he knew the tendency of his disciples to go for the low-hanging fruit. Therefore, in many places around the world, when devotees were cultivating the fortunate members of the Indian congregation, Prabhupada would say, consider the local population, that is our target. So, have we made it easy to approach bhakti? And yes, I know that there are many different types of bhakti vriksha groups, so on and so forth. But I'm talking about our temples as they are now. They're actually meant to be more than places of worship. And that's what Prabhupada had in mind. How are the newcomers who know nothing about Indian tradition, Indian culture, how are they going to approach bhakti when they come to a temple or center? In other words, Prabhupada had more in mind for temples than just places of deity worship. He wanted the temples to be places where guests could be received and get a favorable impression and be treated nicely and cultivated. So, in the outreach centers, in the cities that I've tried to develop, we have our mission statement. Mission statements are for establishing company culture. So the mission statement that we've been working on for 20 years is, we make it easy. We make it easy, number one, to approach bhakti. Number two, we make it easy to grow organically in bhakti. And number three, we make it easy for distributing bhakti to others. We make it easy. Doesn't mean we water down the philosophy, but we make an ambience, we make a facility where people can, in a relaxed way, be brought along in bhakti. So I'd like you to consider that possibility, rather than we make it difficult. And please look at your first world temple with a different vision. And there are always exceptions, I know. I see Radha Krishna Prabhu from Hungary back there. He and I both know you. The Budapest temple, you walk in, there's a receptionist, there's a desk, there are chairs, there are couches. But these are exceptions. At the Budapest temple, there's someone suitable for receiving the guests. We'll talk to them, and everything is orchestrated. Most of our temples aren't like that. I remember when I first went to the temple in New York, and it's a long story how I got in my mind to go visit the temple. I was very hesitant, had no idea what to expect. I had read Prabhupada's books 4 hours a day for 6 months straight without ever visiting a temple or center, because I thought the Hare Krishnas, you know, they're a bit strange, but their books are wonderful. So with great trepidation, with great anxiety, I approached the temple, the famous Henry Street Temple in New York City, 1972. And I was nervous. I wasn't a countercultural person. I wasn't mainstream, I wasn't counterculture, wasn't a hippie. And I remember, I walked up to the steps, fearful. I could hear the cartels, these strange sounds of cartels from 2 blocks away. From 1 block away, I could smell incense. And so I just didn't know what planet I was approaching. And then I walked up the steps, I opened the door, and at the door was an official greeter. And as soon as I took 1 step inside the door, he said to me, "Welcome, brother, you've come to the right place." Come on in, take off your shoes, put your shoes right here, go on in the temple room, move your feet around a bit to the music, we're here for you. So all my, fears were just shattered. Now, how many temples these days in the first world would you go to and get that experience? No, when you go to an ISKCON temple in the first world these days, you better know what you're doing. You better know what you're about. You better, have some kind of pre-knowledge, pre-awareness. You better know someone, otherwise you'll be lost. And it's like our attitude is, hey, you want to be a Hare Krishna? You should know what to do in advance. The burden's on you. Call us when you figured it all out. So, instead of our making it easy, we make it very difficult. And again, I'm talking about our facilities. Facility is something. We've forgotten the importance of facility. Prabhupada didn't forget, we've forgotten. We basically just scratched temples off the list as possible places where people could be brought along in bhakti. So, let's go at things from another angle. Based in New Zealand, I see young people, when I say young people, persons under the age of 30 from all over the world. It's an alternative tourist place. Even now in India, it's become the rage for the fashion for Indian university students who want to go study in New Zealand. It used to be Australia, and Australia tightened up their immigration policy. So now, our Bhaktivedanta Prabhu from Noida is telling me how New Zealand universities are doing outreach programs at 5-star hotels. The buzz is going around, well, that's the place to study, that's the cool place. So I get to see students from all over the world, especially USA, UK, Scandinavia, Germany. So, I was explaining the other day, in one of our previous sessions, that some programs I do, outreach programs, seminars, anyone can walk in and attend, and afterwards there's prasad. Simultaneously there could be a yoga class going on, cafe-like situation, along with seminars and workshop rooms, couches, chairs, ambience, no threatening cultural intimidations. Deities aren't necessary, no obeisances. Sometimes while I'm giving a seminar, and we always try to minimize the presence of already established devotees, because we don't want the place to become a devotee place. We want our visitors to feel like this is their place, so they don't have to think they're in the minority. In fact, they are in the far majority. We want them to feel that this place is for them. And we want them to look around and see that 90% of the persons there, they can identify with. Oh, there's nothing strange going on here. Yeah. So, sometimes, anyone here from the USA? No. Okay, yeah. Raise Krishna. Sometimes there are more American students at these programs than locals. And I ask these American students, do you know anything about Hare Krishna? And none of them have ever said that they have seen devotees before. And they're from all over the USA. They have never seen devotees before. What's happened? When I was a young devotee in New York in '73, you know what the most frequent comment we got as we were out in New York doing Harinam, doing book distribution, whatever? The most frequent comment that we got from passerbys, you guys are everywhere. They thought, often New Yorkers would tell us, there must be thousands of you in this city. You're everywhere. Now we've come to a point where Americans, they have never seen devotees. Okay, contrast that with the British. Anyone here from UK? So many travelers from the UK. And I asked them, have you seen Hare Krishna before? And every one of them says, yes. Yes, we know what is Hare Krishna. And then in the British discreet way, and you know, the British are more indirect and discreet than Americans. So in a very discreet British way, they said, yes, we've seen Hare Krishna before. Isn't that the other people's religion? Isn't that for the other people? They all say that. In other words, that's not a British thing, it's an immigrant thing, isn't it? You know, very subtle attitudes there. Isn't that for the other people? So, this shows that we have a lot of work to do. Smita Krishna Maharaj, yeah, I see persons from Scandinavia all the time, especially Sweden, many places in Scandinavia. Hare Krishna. I've never seen it before. So it's interesting. USA, never seen Hare Krishnas. Germany, never seen Hare Krishnas. Sweden, never seen Hare Krishnas. UK, everyone knows about them, but it's the other people. So, this shows we have a lot of work to do. Now I'll tell you a story. It's a horror story, I'm going to warn you. I've been telling it the previous sessions, and I think it really makes a point about how our urban presence, and remember, at this point in the world, the UN says that 50% of the world's population lives in cities, and by mid-century it's going to be 70%. So urban outreach is so important. I have a youngest brother, and he was a smart guy, and during his undergraduate university days, he was a debater, and he entered a nationwide debate contest, and he was #1 in the USA at the university debate. He won the championship for the whole nation. So Harvard Law School called him up and said, look, Nick, how much money do you need? We want you to come to Harvard Law. So he was studying Harvard Law, and while he was there, he was focusing on ISKCON court cases. He never told me this. You know, older brother, younger brother thing, you know. So he's 11 or so years my junior. He was studying all ISKCON cases, from airports to brainwashing to this to that, attacks by the so-called anti-cult movement. He knew it all. He was thinking, I found out later, this was going to be his specialty. He didn't want to just be a corporate lawyer doing routine stuff. He thought, this is a cutting-edge field. This is what I'd like to do. He never told me. So, after making ISKCON his specialty, he, on his own, went to the Boston Temple. Walked up the steps, knocked on the door. Someone opens the door. They don't invite him. Opens the door. Yes? And he said, my name is such and such. He didn't say he's my brother. My name is such and such, and I'm a Harvard Law student. I've been focusing on ISKCON. I'd like to know, could you use any legal help? No, we have our own lawyer. Thank you. He was so shattered, you could say he was puffed up. Anyway, he's just unfortunate. It's all his fault. He was so shattered, that was it for him. Now, he eventually married a Harvard Law graduate, so those were two persons that could have helped ISKCON. And now he is general counsel for Toyota. He advises the board. He sits on the board of Toyota. So, this is it's a horror story. It shows that we're not set up properly. Our facilities aren't in place. Our attitudes are not in place. We have a lot of work to do in terms of getting our act together at the front door, creating a facility, making our temples into facilities that can actually, or if not temples, somewhere else. Like Prabhupada had, he himself said, restaurant combined with reading room. He was such a vision he had. How can we make it easy for people to approach bhakti without watering the philosophy down? And I'm not talking about changing the language, get rid of all the Sanskrit, get rid of all the Bengali. I'm not even so much talking about dress. I'm talking about attitude and facility. Please keep that in mind. And of course, if we're going to be sensitive to an audience, we want them to feel that they can identify with the place, and for the most part, identify with the people at the place. So, obviously, at an outreach center, there's no need to overload the place with dhotis and saris. It doesn't mean that those things have to go out the window, but number one, keep this in mind. An outreach place is for whom? For whom? Is it for the devotees? No! Of course, when I do programs, I'm dressed as I am now. But the whole room isn't filled with eager, beaver devotees. And the guests are, in the background looking uncomfortable, like. And you know how it is, you're trying to do a program for non-devotees, and then the devotees want to ask all the questions. You ever had that experience? Maharaj, now, in the Kali Yuga, what happens when Lord Chaitanya doesn't come? I could ask you that, Bob. There's something about Hare Krishnas that they like to show off in public, They like to show the guests that the guests don't know. And we as Hare Krishnas, we know. You mean you don't know who the 9th avatar is? So anyway, I think you get the point. Now, let's turn to another aspect. And the two, amazingly, are related. ISKCON farms. What? farm? You have any farmers here? Let's take the USA, for example. At the beginning of the 20th century, around the year 1900, 80% of the American population was connected to agriculture. Now, what is it? 1%. Half of the percentage that's in prison. 1% are directly connected to agriculture. Yet, Prabhupada had such a bold vision of connecting urban outreach with rural projects. If you go through Prabhupada's quotations, which were all known to us in the 70s, we lived on these things, but we forgot about them because, well, farmers, we just didn't know what to do with them. So Prabhupada said that every city center should have a farm. He said, Krishna is the founder-acarya. And just like sometimes he would say, distribute books, distribute books, distribute books 3 times, or for book publication, where is book, where is book, where is book, referring to Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sometimes he would also say, farm, farm, farm. So he had a vision of how the city centers would be connected to farms. He also included, by the way, restaurants in that vision. He said this is a vision for re-spiritualizing the Western world. Now, we've made a mistake. We don't think about farms. The food comes from the store, right? And if there are ISKCON farms, we may consider them to be standalone projects out in the middle of nowhere. But that was never Prabhupada's idea. His idea was that there should be a complete link between the rural project and the city center. And I always point out, you can see practical justification for that vision of Prabhupada's. If you look at Hungary, you'll see that, for example, His Holiness Shivaram Maharaj is always holy without a connection between New Brajadam, which is outside of India, by far ISKCON's most successful farm project, without a connection to the capital city and its urban center in Budapest, New Brajadam would practically not exist. Because the city brings resources, manpower, money, life and energy. But if you just cut the farm off and have it drift in the middle of like nowhere, naturally devotees are going to feel discouraged who are there. They're up against insurmountable odds. So please understand, this was not Prabhupada's vision. He had a scheme for re-spiritualizing Western society involving farms and urban outreach together. Unfortunately, we dropped the ball for the most part. There are always exceptions, but for the most part we dropped the ball in terms of farms. Our devotees who bought farms back in the 70s, they weren't farmers. They didn't know what a farm is, but oh, here's some grass, here's some trees. It's a farm. They didn't understand fertility, water, sunlight. So many times they got places that were just unfavorable. And because those places were difficult to farm, we just thought the whole farm thing is just impractical. And then, of course, not only did we not, in most cases, have good farm land, we also had no farmers. And then the IT came in. And how are you going to keep them on the farm as long as you got IT? However, if you look at the way Western society is going now in the first world, if ISKCON had indeed pushed on Prabhupada's vision, we would be now at the cutting edge. If we had developed that urban-rural connection, we would have, we have such a powerful preaching platform. We could offer the whole picture. Remember, Prabhupada said every city center should have a farm. His broad idea was that if you were not a preacher, you should produce on the farm. Perhaps you could even summarize it in very black and white categories. Overly black and white, but just for the purpose of discussion. Our choice was either to preach or produce. One example I give from the USA. Although devotees have forgotten about farms as a prominent cardinal preaching strategy, look what's happening in the outside world. In the year 2011, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced an extraordinary shift, a seismic demographic shift. For the first time in 150 years, the number of farms in the USA was no longer falling, but rising. Young people are getting back into farming. They're buying small farms. For the first time in 150 years, the number of farms in the USA was not falling. And in fact, not only was it not falling, but it was rising. So this shows you, if we would have carried on Prabhupada's vision, where we'd be sitting now. Another example. In New Zealand, Prabhupada knew this is a first-class agricultural country. He would talk like that. This dairy products, everyone knows, exquisite, topmost agricultural country. So he told the first devotee who went to New Zealand, to Krishna, he told them in Mumbai, when you get there, don't start a temple in the city. Get a farm and start one ashram garden. But the instruction was just too radical, evidently, for devotees. You know, we were Prabhupada, in other words, we're Hare Krishnas, you know, temple, you know, marble floor, deities. Just think, he told them, don't, when you get there and you open up Krishna Conscious Society, don't get a temple in the city. So this shows you how far ahead Prabhupada was. So now, let me bring out another problem that's affecting our outreach in the West. I explain it this way. Anyone who became a devotee in the 60s and 70s in the first world, Sweet Krishna Maharaj from Sweden, but you joined in Germany, yes? Yes. Yes. Anyone else who, yes? Where? Toronto. Toronto. You came to Bhakti in the Satya Yuga. You came during the Satya Yuga compared to what is going on now. You came to Bhakti at a time when people still knew what is a family, what is family commitment. They had some basic Western Christian Jewish principles of moral living, and it's all out the window now. So one thing that has discouraged, indirectly or directly, our older devotees from reaching out to the Western population, non-Indian population, is that you're not dealing with civilization anymore. There's just nothing, even the basics, Kali Yuga basics of human civilization, they're gone. And so our older devotees don't know how to relate to that. Things have become so wild. In other words, who's going to train all these people if you could actually cultivate them? Who's going to train them not only in bhakti, but how to be a human being and have a human civilization? Who's going to do that? I don't want to do that. It's much easier to what? Deal with the low-hanging fruit, juicy, sweet, nice Indian congregations, tradition, stability, morality. Much easier. Like one temple president said in the USA, You know, the great thing about the Indian congregation is you don't have to feed them, you don't have to clothe them, you don't have to worry about their marriages, you don't have to worry about their education, you just treat them nicely and collect the donations. We deal with the non-Indian congregation, wow. You pour your heart out, you shed so much blood for them, and they turn around and sue you, accuse you of this and that, they take you to court. It's just wild. they internet you, they criticize you on the internet. After you've given your heart and soul. So our Western leaders, you know, they unconsciously, I've noticed that they just, oh my God, you know. The world isn't like when they joined in the 60s and 70s. There's no countercultural tsunami carrying persons to the door. Even the basics of Western civilization are gone now. So that has created a problem for us. Are we willing, first of all, to set ourselves up so that we can deal with newcomers, reach out to them, bring them along, and once you get them to your front door and you can treat them nicely, who's going to train them? Who's going to teach them how to be candidates for proper family life, or how to be candidates for brahmachari life, or how to be just a normal human being, a chance Hare Krishna? Who's going to do that? Where's everybody going to get that from? So this has really affected our outreach. And therefore, because our outreach to the non-Indian public has declined, we have no big quantity or even medium quantity of candidates for succession who are willing to deal with the Western world. Yes, we have candidates for succession who will certainly deal with the Indian world, the fortunate, blessed Indian world. But in terms of dealing with the wild Westerners, very few want to handle that. That's the reality. So these are the crises and challenges that are affecting us. Remember, the succession problem begins at the front door. How are we going to make bhakti available for the whole world? We need to advance beyond the low-hanging fruit, which is certainly auspicious and juicy. But we have to consider the whole tree. We want everyone to be Krishna conscious. But we have these barriers. Facility, attitude, they're missing. So we've covered these three areas: urban outreach, rural development. I could go much more into rural development. You've seen other seminars given by Krishna Prabhupada, other Maharajas. Every ISKCON devotee in the 70s knew that Prabhupada was pushing farms like anything. We all knew it. And most of us have nicely forgotten. We got farm, so much trouble, and you know, we want to be in the cities with the IT. But remember, Prabhupada had a holistic vision for transforming the first world. Not only the first world, but we're focusing in our seminar on the first world. Transforming human society through the connection between the city and the rural project. Where are our leaders who are going to deal with that? Srila Prabhupada's vision for transforming society. Right now, they're having a drought in California. So what? So what? They're having a historic drought in California, right? Big deal. 50% of the vegetables and fruits in the USA come from California. So that's another topic about the world food food situation. I can also speak on that, but not today. I'm just trying today to create a need for understanding. The need for understanding our first world ISKCON situation, the problems we face, the challenges we may be neglecting. We are neglected. And in this way, with your good intelligence, you can start to think of how to get things back on track again. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
If you have any questions, you can come up and ask because otherwise, if someone, all right, well, take a few questions if you want to ask. It's 23 after 12. Otherwise, yes, Maharaj, my dear friend.
The challenge. Okay, so when you get so far with verbal outreach and you protect them, and then what is the next step? Are they going to get regular devotees, like maybe in the temple, or what's your vision?
This is why I said the cultivation problem is just the beginning. Then there has to be training and development. Who's going to do that?
Yes, that's a question.
You have to have devotees who are committed to training devotees, developing their potential, so that the devotee, the newcomer, can choose. Do I want to be a candidate for family life? Do I want to be a candidate for the brahmacharya ashram? Do I want to be just a whatever, you know, chant Hare Krishna, whatever, you know, bachelor, you know, whatever. Where are those persons?
Could we call them Varnashram Dharmas? Could we call it Varnashram Dharmas development?
Well, I'm hinting that we need to recognize that Western society is breaking down. You have to have some culture, so if it's not the Dharmic culture, what is it? What do you got to replace? What do you got to substitute? So I'm just seeking to lay the foundation here, and then you can start to fill in the lights. I do, when there's time, I can give you reams of statistics about what's happening in the first world in terms of family life, abuse, this, that, the other. It's extraordinary.
Depressing.
It's the reality that we have to deal with. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Hare Krishna.